Officers, remove this man immediately. People like him don't belong in communities like ours.
That was Vivian Hardcastle, HOA president for 9 years, standing on my lawn in a powder blue suit that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. She was pointing directly at me like I was a stray that had wandered onto her pristine property. 3 police cruisers had pulled up to the curb, lights still flashing, while my moving truck sat half unloaded in the driveway. Boxes labeled kitchen and books and start over were scattered across the walkway like evidence at a crime scene. I stood there holding a lamp that had belonged to my grandmother, watching this woman call the authorities on me for the unforgivable crime of moving into my own house. She had no idea who she was dealing with. What Vivian Hardcastle did not know, what nobody in Lakeview Shores knew, was that I was not just some random buyer who had gotten lucky at a court auction. I was the new owner of Sterling Property Management, the company that collected every single HOA fee in this neighborhood. And by Friday, Vivian Hardcastle would be writing me a check for 5 times what she had been paying. But let me back up 72 hours to when I first rolled through those gates thinking I was driving toward peace, toward quiet, toward the kind of life where the biggest decision I had to make was whether to fish in the morning or the afternoon. I should have known better. The security guard at the gate squinted at my truck like it personally offended him. Rust spots on the fender, dent on the passenger door from a repo case gone sideways back in 2019. The kind of vehicle that screamed government salary, not lakefront living. Name and unit number? I handed him the deed transfer papers. He scanned them twice, then a third time, like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. Holloway. For the Ashworth estate? That lakefront property? That's the one. His eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. The Ashworth place had been empty for 2 years, ever since the FBI seized it as part of the Greystone investigation. The investigation I had started. The one that cost me my state job, my marriage, and 3 years of my life buried in financial forensics. Most whistleblowers get a percentage of what they help recover. I got something better. When Greystone Developments collapsed under the weight of their own fraud, $340 million embezzled from HOA reserve funds across 17 states, the court needed somewhere to put the pieces. Sterling Property Management. 43 properties under contract, and 1 lakefront house that the company's disgraced CEO had built for himself with stolen money. The same house I was now moving into. The guard handed back my papers with the expression of someone who had just been asked to believe the impossible. Welcome to Lakeview Shores, Mr. Holloway. The community office is on your left if you need anything. I would not need anything from their office, but I suspected they would need quite a bit from me before this was over. In the passenger seat sat a banker's box marked Sterling PM, Lakeview Shores. Inside that box were 9 years of financial records, resident complaints, and 1 very interesting audit trail that led straight to the HOA president's husband. Quick question before we continue. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your country in the comments. I am genuinely curious because stories like this seem to resonate everywhere. There is someone in power who forgot they are supposed to serve, not rule. The property itself was everything I had been promised and nothing I had expected. 3,200 square feet of glass and cedar, positioned on a peninsula that jutted into the lake like a pointing finger. The previous owner had spared no expense, which made sense considering he had been spending other people's money. Italian marble countertops, heated floors in every bathroom, a dock that extended 40 feet into water so clear you could see fish swimming beneath the surface. I parked the truck and stepped out into morning air that smelled like pine and possibility. For exactly 17 minutes, I allowed myself to believe this would be easy. Then I noticed the woman trimming hedges next door. She moved like someone who had learned to be invisible. Late 60s, maybe early 70s, work gloves that had seen better decades. Her shoulders hunched forward in the particular posture of someone who expected to be yelled at. She caught me looking and quickly turned away, but not before I saw her expression change. Recognition, then fear, then something that looked almost like hope. I had seen that look before, in the faces of HOA fraud victims across 12 states. People who had lost their homes, their savings, their sense of security, all because someone in a position of power decided the rules did not apply to them. "Morning," I called out. She flinched like I had thrown something at her. "Good morning, sir. I will be out of your way shortly." "Take your time. I am just unloading." She nodded without meeting my eyes and returned to her work with renewed urgency. But I noticed how her hands trembled as she clipped the hedges, and I noticed how she kept glancing toward the road as if expecting something unpleasant to arrive. It did, at exactly 8:23 a.m. The Mercedes G-Wagon pulled up like a tank claiming territory. The moving crew, two guys from a company out of Detroit who had been chatting about the Lions game, stopped mid-lift to watch. She stepped out in stages. First, the designer heel, testing the pavement like it might not be worthy of her presence. Then the leg. Then the rest of her, unfolding from that vehicle like she was gracing a red carpet with her attendants. Light blue suit, perfectly pressed. Pearl earrings that caught the morning sun. Hair that probably required its own zip code worth of products to maintain. And a smile that reminded me of the expression a cat makes right before it stops playing with the mouse. "Good morning," she called out, her voice carrying that particular frequency that makes reasonable people tense. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Vivian Hardcastle, president of the Lakeview Shores Homeowners Association." She extended her hand like she expected me to kiss it. "Mercer Holloway, new owner." Her smile flickered. Just for a moment, barely perceptible, but I had spent 15 years reading micro-expressions across conference tables and courtrooms. I had watched CFOs lie to federal investigators. I had seen embezzlers maintain composure under oath. Vivian Hardcastle was not happy. She was not happy at all. "The Ashworth property," she said slowly, rolling the words around like they tasted sour. "I was not aware it had cleared probate." "It did not go through probate. Court-ordered asset transfer." Another flicker, this time closer to the alarm. "I see. Well, regardless of how you acquired the property, there are certain procedures that must be followed." She pulled a clipboard from somewhere, probably from the same dimension that produced her endless supply of condescension. "All new residents must complete a background check, provide 3 personal references from existing community members, and submit to an architectural review of any planned modifications." I looked at the moving truck, at the boxes, at the 2 Detroit guys who were now openly watching the show. "I am moving furniture, Mrs. Hardcastle, not building an addition." Her laugh was the kind that never reaches the eyes. "Oh, Mr. Holloway, in Lakeview Shores, everything requires approval. The paint color of your mailbox, the species of flowers in your garden, even—" She paused, looking at my truck with undisguised contempt. "The vehicles you park in your own driveway." I had seen the Lakeview Shores covenant documents, all 847 pages. I had read them at 3 a.m. in a federal courthouse while building the case that brought down the man who wrote them. "I am familiar with the covenants," I said. Something in my tone made her pause, Her eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing. Good. Let her wonder. Well then, you know that compliance is not optional. I'll have the welcome committee deliver the appropriate forms this afternoon. In the meantime, I do hope you'll make yourself, another pause, another assessment, comfortable. She turned to leave, then stopped. Her gaze had drifted to the woman trimming hedges, who was now working with the desperate efficiency of someone trying to disappear. Odessa, the Pemberton beds need attention. When you're finished here. Yes, Mrs. Hardcastle. No please, no thank you. Just command and compliance. I filed that away for later. Vivian climbed back into her G-Wagon and pulled away, but not before taking one more long look at my property. At my house. At the lakefront view that she clearly believed belonged to someone more deserving. The movers exchanged glances. Is that the HOA president? One of them asked, apparently. Good luck with that, he muttered, and went back to unloading boxes. I spent the next 2 hours unpacking essentials while keeping one eye on the road. Experience had taught me that people like Vivian Hardcastle never mowed just one appearance. They probed. They tested. They returned with reinforcements when the initial assault failed to achieve the desired result. She returned at 9:15 a.m. with 2 additional women in matching tennis whites. They looked like they had been bred specifically for country club luncheons, all perfect posture and practiced smiles that did not quite disguise the predatory interest in their eyes. Mr. Holloway, I've consulted with our board members, and we have serious concerns about your documentation. My documentation is recorded with the county. Recorded documentation can be falsified. She said it like she was explaining basic arithmetic to a slow student. Until we verify your ownership through proper HOA channels, I'm afraid you're trespassing on community property. I set down the box I was carrying. Mrs. Hardcastle, I purchased this property through a federal court proceeding. The deed was recorded yesterday afternoon. You're welcome to contact the county recorder's office if you have questions. The county recorder's office doesn't oversee community compliance. I do. The 2 women behind her nodded in synchronized agreement. A Greek chorus of suburban entitlement. And what exactly does compliance require? She smiled. The kind of smile that usually precedes very bad news. A full review of your financial qualifications, verification of your background, approval from the architectural committee, and of course, payment of all outstanding assessments on the property. What outstanding assessments? The Ashworth property has been vacant for 2 years, Mr. Holloway. Monthly fees continued to accrue, plus late penalties, plus interest. She consulted her clipboard with theatrical precision. The current balance is $43,217. $43,000. For a house that had been seized by the federal government as evidence in a fraud investigation. A house that legally could not be occupied during that period. I'll review the documentation, I said evenly. I'm afraid that won't be sufficient. She pulled out her phone with the practiced motion of someone who had done this before. Many times before. Until this matter is resolved, I'm obligated to report unauthorized occupation of community property. You're going to call the police because I'm moving into my own house? I'm going to call the police because a man with suspicious documentation is refusing to vacate a property that is currently in violation of community standards. She began dialing. It's really quite simple, Mr. Holloway. In Lakeview Shores, we protect our residents. I watched her make the call. Yes, hello. I need to report a trespassing situation at 1847 Shoreline Drive in Lakeview Shores. A man claiming to own the Ashworth property is refusing to leave, and we have reason to believe the documentation he's presenting may be fraudulent. She paused, listening. No, he hasn't been violent. Yet. But he's becoming increasingly agitated, and we'd appreciate a police presence. I had not moved, had not raised my voice. I had not done anything except stand on my own property holding a box of books. The two tennis white women watched with the satisfied expressions of spectators at a blood sport. Odessa, still trimming hedges nearby, had gone completely still. One of the movers, a big guy with a Detroit Tigers cap, caught my eye. He mouthed the words, "You want us to stay," and I nodded. The police arrived in 11 minutes. 3 cruisers, which seemed excessive for a moving day dispute. But I suspected Vivian had emphasized the urgency. Officer Keegan Braswell stepped out of the lead car with the weary expression of a man who had drawn the short straw on this particular morning. He was perhaps 35, with the kind of face that had seen enough domestic disputes and neighborhood complaints to fill several lifetimes. He examined my papers with the thoroughness of someone who knew exactly whose wife was standing behind him, making impatient noises. "Mr. Holloway, everything here appears to be in order." "That's because it is in order." Vivian stepped forward, heels clicking on my driveway like a countdown. "Officer, I must insist that you examine these documents more carefully. The circumstances of this acquisition are highly irregular." "Ma'am." His voice went flat in a way that suggested this was not their first interaction. "The documentation is legitimate. This is Mr. Holloway's property. He has every right to be here. But the outstanding assessments alone should prevent. HOA disputes are civil matters, Mrs. Hardcastle, not criminal ones. Unless Mr. Holloway poses an actual threat, which he clearly does not, there's nothing more I can do here." Her face went through several colors before settling on a shade I would describe as vendetta purple. "Very well, officer. I'll note your reluctance to protect community interests." She turned to me, and the mask of civility had slipped considerably. "But Mr. Holloway, as HOA president, I'm required to inform you that your property is currently in violation of 17 separate community standards. Failure to remedy these violations within 72 hours will result in fines totaling." She consulted her clipboard with theatrical precision. $43,000. 17 violations. $43,000. For a house I had owned for less than 3 hours. "What violations specifically?" "The list will be delivered this afternoon. I'd suggest you review it carefully." She gathered her tennis-white entourage with a glance. "Welcome to Lakeview Shores, Mr. Holloway. I do hope your stay is brief." They departed in formation, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and barely concealed malice. Officer Braswell watched them go, then turned to me with an expression of quiet sympathy. "Word of advice? Document everything. She's filed complaints against every new resident for the past 5 years. My department has a whole filing cabinet just for her calls. Appreciate the warning. Good luck." He said it like a man who did not expect luck to be enough. After the police left, after the movers finished and drove away with promises to return tomorrow for the remaining furniture, I sat on my dock and watched the sun sink toward the tree line. The water was impossibly calm, the kind of stillness that makes you believe, however briefly, that the world might also be peaceful. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Careful footsteps, the kind that have learned which boards creak. "You're not leaving." It was not a question. The woman from this morning, Odessa, had materialized from the shadows between properties like someone who had mapped every security camera's blind spot. "No, I'm not." She lowered herself onto the dock beside me with the careful movements of someone whose joints had seen better decades. Up close, she looked older than I had initially thought. 70, maybe 72, with hands that told stories of manual labor and a face that spoke of accumulated grief. "Good," she said quietly. "I've been waiting 3 years for someone who wouldn't run." We sat in silence for a moment, watching light fade from the water. "How many?" I finally asked. She understood the question without clarification. 17 families. That's how many the Hardcastles have pushed out since they took over. Fines nobody can afford. Violations that appear overnight. Legal threats that bankrupt people before they ever see a courtroom. And you? The question landed heavily between us. I owned 1823 Shoreline for 31 years. My husband built that house with his own hands. Her voice cracked slightly on the word husband. They found code violations that would have cost $200,000 to fix. Violations that didn't exist until Dalton Hardcastle decided he wanted my lot for his boat access expansion. "Where do you live now?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The cleaning cottage behind the community center. Vivian lets me stay there in exchange for keeping their dirty little secrets clean." The sun had dropped below the trees now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere across the water, a fish jumped, sending ripples across the glass-smooth surface. "What kind of secrets?" Odessa reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Yellowed, creased, handled many times. She handed it to me with the reverence of someone presenting sacred evidence. "The reserve fund reports they submit to the state? They're not the same as the real numbers." I unfolded the paper carefully. 2 columns. One labeled official and one labeled actual. Dates going back 6 years. Numbers that told a story more clearly than any narrative ever could. The difference was $2.3 million. "Where did you get this?" "I clean the office. Vivian thinks I'm invisible. People say things around invisible people. Leave things on desks. Forget to lock filing cabinets." Odessa's voice had hardened into something that sounded remarkably like resolve. "I've been collecting proof for 3 years, Mr. Holloway, waiting for someone who could do something with it." I looked at the paper again, then at the woman who had risked everything to preserve it. "Does anyone else know about this?" "Just you, and now you have a decision to make." She stood slowly, joints protesting. "You can take that paper and leave. Sell the house, walk away, pretend you never saw anything. Or you can stay and find out just how deep this goes." She began walking back toward the shadows. "Odessa." She paused. "Thank you." A small nod. Then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness between the expensive houses and their carefully manicured lies. I sat on the dock until the stars came out, turning that piece of paper over and over in my hands. $2.3 million. 17 families were displaced. 9 years of systematic theft dressed up in Robert's Rules of Order and community standards. Same playbook, different players. At 2:47 a.m., I found it. My laptop was open on the kitchen counter, surrounded by the banker's boxes I had brought from Sterling Property Management's archives. Coffee had gone cold hours ago. Outside, the lake was black glass beneath a sliver of moon. Sterling's internal records showed that Lakeview Shores had been paying HOA fees based on a rate structure approved in 2019. Normal annual increases of 3 to 5%. Nothing unusual. But Vivian's HOA had been collecting from residents at a rate 34% higher than what Sterling was receiving. The difference was being pocketed. The money flowed through a consulting company called Hardcastle Strategic Solutions, owned by Dalton Hardcastle, paid for community enhancement services that, as far as I could tell, consisted entirely of invoices for work that never happened. $847,000 over 9 years. But here was what kept me awake until dawn. Vivian was not just stealing from this community. She was a regional director for something called the Coastal HOA Alliance. 14 communities, 37,000 households. If she was running the same scheme everywhere, the numbers made my chest tight. Not from fear, from recognition. I had seen this pattern before, in Greystone, in the case that destroyed my career and rebuilt it from the ashes. Same playbook, different players, much bigger scale. By morning, I had a timeline. By noon, I had a target. By sunset of day 2, I had 17 fresh violation notices taped to my door, and a burning certainty that Vivian Hardcastle was about to have the worst week of her life. The violations arrived like clockwork. Day 2, 6:12 a.m. 3 fluorescent orange stickers on my truck. Unauthorized vehicle. Color not approved. My truck was silver. The approved colors, according to the notice, were coastal mist, harbor gray, and driftwood beige. I looked up coastal mist. It was silver with a slightly blue undertone. My truck had a slightly green undertone. Fine. $350. Day 2, 11:47 a.m. Improper garbage receptacle placement. Container visible from street at 6:23 a.m. My garbage can was in my garage. The garage door had been open for 4 minutes while I retrieved my toolbox. Fine. $275. Day 2, 4:33 p.m. Unapproved exterior lighting modification. I had replaced a burned-out porch bulb. Fine. $500. Day 3, 8 a.m. Failure to submit landscaping plan for approval. Existing vegetation in non-compliance with community aesthetic standards. The non-compliant vegetation was grass. The grass that had been there when the house was built. Fine. $1,200. By the end of day 3, my accumulated violations totaled $43,000. The exact amount Vivian had quoted on my first day. Almost as if the number had been predetermined and the violations manufactured to match. The envelope arrived by certified mail on day 3 afternoon, hand-delivered by Vivian herself, who stood on my porch with the satisfaction of someone presenting an execution warrant. Emergency community meeting. Tomorrow evening. 7 p.m. sharp. Attendance is mandatory for all residents under review. Under review for what? Her smile was porcelain and poison. For determination of whether your continued residence poses a threat to community harmony. She turned to leave, then paused. The pause was deliberate, calculated, designed to make whatever came next land harder. Oh, and Mr. Holloway? The Ashworth house has a rather complicated history. Wouldn't want anyone digging up old unpleasantness. She meant it as a threat. She had no idea she had just handed me permission. That evening, I made 2 phone calls. The first went to Ren Gallagher, the young property manager at Sterling, who had been handling day-to-day operations while I sorted through the legal mess of taking over a company I had helped destroy. Ren, I need the complete fee structure for Lakeview Shores. Every assessment, every special charge, every late penalty for the past 9 years. That's a lot of data. I could hear papers shuffling. Can I ask why? Because I'm about to exercise the owner's discretion on rate adjustment. Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Sir, are you sure? The current president has connections. Her husband is... I know exactly who her husband is. Send me everything. And Ren? Prepare a formal notice of management change, effective Friday. The second call went to a number I had not dialed in 2 years. Holloway, thought you retired. I thought so too, Cassidy. Then I moved into a neighborhood that's running the exact same playbook as Greystone. Special Agent Cassidy Monroe's voice sharpened immediately. We had worked together on the original investigation. She had been the one who believed me when no one else would. Same playbook? Reserve fund manipulation, shell company invoicing, regional coordination across multiple HOAs. How big? If I'm right, 14 communities. Somewhere north of $40 million in misappropriated funds. Holy cow. Yeah, that's what I said. What do you need? Right now? Nothing official, but I'm about to shake a tree pretty hard. When the branches start falling, I'd like to know someone's ready to catch them. Send me what you've got. I'll start a preliminary file. I hung up and looked out at the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the last light of day like a mirror that showed possibilities instead of realities. Tomorrow evening, Vivian Hardcastle will try to exile me from my own home. She would stand at a podium surrounded by her loyalists and her lawyers and her husband's political connections, convinced that she held all the cards. She had no idea I was holding the deck. The community center looked like every HOA meeting room I had ever seen. Folding chairs arranged in interrogation formation, a head table positioned on a raised platform, and Vivian Hardcastle seated in the center, like she was presiding over a tribunal. 60 residents filled the seats. Most looked uncomfortable, shifting in their chairs with the particular restlessness of people who would rather be anywhere else. A few looked scared, glancing toward the exits as if calculating escape routes. And scattered throughout, I recognized the expressions I had seen in courtrooms across a dozen states. People who had been bullied so long they had forgotten they could fight back. I took a seat in the back row. The metal chair was cold through my clothes. Vivian tapped her microphone. The room fell silent with the trained obedience of a population that had learned the cost of dissent. This evening's agenda concerns the new resident at 1847 Shoreline Drive. She let the address hang in the air like an accusation. Mr. Holloway has accumulated 17 violations in 72 hours. A record for our community. Scattered murmurs. A few nervous laughs from people who did not yet realize they should be nervous for different reasons. Furthermore, we have serious concerns about the circumstances of his property acquisition. As many of you know, the Ashworth property was complicated. She pulled out a folder thick with papers, the theatrical gesture of someone who had practiced this moment in front of a mirror. Our investigation has revealed that Mr. Holloway was involved in the federal case that seized this property from its rightful owner. In other words, he manipulated the legal system to steal a home he could never have afforded legitimately. The room erupted, exactly as she had planned. Heads turned toward me. Whispers became murmurs and open hostility. A woman in the third row actually moved her chair away, as if proximity to me might be contagious. Vivian waited for the noise to peak, then raised her hand for silence. The obedient hush that followed was almost impressive. Given these circumstances, the board moves to terminate Mr. Holloway's residency pending a full investigation. All in favor? Hands began to rise, slowly at first, then gathering momentum as people looked around to see what their neighbors were doing. I stood up. The motion drew every eye in the room. Vivian's smile sharpened. Mr. Holloway, you'll have your opportunity to speak after the vote. Mrs. Hardcastle, you're correct that I was involved in the federal case. I let my voice carry. 15 years of courtroom experience had taught me how to fill a space without shouting, how to command attention without demanding it. But you left out a few details. I walked forward slowly. Each step is deliberate. Each moment is calculated. I pulled out my own folder, the one I had been building for 3 days. I was the lead forensic auditor who discovered that Greystone Developments had embezzled $340 million from HOA reserve fund funds across 17 states. The house I now own was built with stolen money. Money taken from families exactly like the ones sitting in this room. The murmurs shifted, confusion replacing hostility. I didn't manipulate the system. I exposed it. And the court awarded me this property as part of the whistleblower settlement because I lost my career, my marriage, and 3 years of my life making sure people like the former owner couldn't hurt anyone else. I had reached the front of the room now. Vivian's smile had frozen into something that looked more like a grimace. Her husband Dalton, seated in the front row in a suit that cost more than most people's cars, had gone very still. But that's not why I'm standing here tonight. I placed a document on the table in front of Vivian. This is the reserve fund report your HOA submitted to the state last year. I placed another document beside it. This is the actual financial status of your accounts. The room had gone absolutely silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. The difference is $2.3 million. If you are still here at this point, you are probably feeling exactly what I felt standing in that room. That moment when you realize the bully is not as powerful as they pretended to be. If this story is hitting home for you, drop a thumbs up emoji in the comments. Let me know I am not alone in this. Vivian's recovery was impressive. I will give her that. She had spent 9 years perfecting the art of deflection. These are clearly fabricated documents designed to distract from your own questionable behavior. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. Security? Please escort Mr. Holloway out. No one moved. An elderly man in the third row spoke up. His voice carried the particular authority of someone who had been patient for far too long. Mrs. Hardcastle, I've been asking to see our reserve fund statements for 4 years. You always said they were being audited. They are being audited, Wallace. These things take time. 4 years of time? The room was shifting. I could feel it in the way people straightened in their seats, in the way eyes that had been avoiding mine were now meeting them with something that looked like hope. A woman near the back stood up. What about the special assessment for the pool renovation? We paid that 2 years ago. The pool still hasn't been touched. Infrastructure projects have complex timelines. And the security upgrade? Another voice, another question. We raised $12,000 for new cameras. Where are they? The dam was cracking. Years of suppressed frustration, of unanswered question, of bills paid for services never rendered, all of it coming to the surface at once. Vivian was losing control of the room, and she knew it. Her voice pitched higher, sharper, the melody of authority breaking down into the discord of desperation. This is harassment, defamation. My husband is a county commissioner, and I promise you, Mr. Holloway, you will regret. Mrs. Hardcastle. My voice cut through hers like a blade. Do you know who manages the HOA fee collection for Lakeview Shores? She blinked, thrown off script. Sterling Property Management. What does that have to do with? And do you know who owns Sterling Property Management? The room went absolutely silent. The kind of silence that exists in the moment between lightning and thunder. I pulled out one final document, the court order that had changed everything. As of 18 months ago, Sterling Property Management is wholly owned by Mercer Holloway. That's me. Which means every HOA fee you've collected for the past 18 months has gone through a company I control. Vivian's face was drained of color. The transformation was remarkable, like watching a painting fade in real time. And as owner, I have complete discretion over fee structures. Effective this Friday, the Lakeview Shores management fee will be adjusted to reflect the actual cost of the community enhancement services your husband's company has been billing us for. I paused. Let it land. Current assessment, $450 per month. New assessment, $2,250 per month. That's a 500% increase, applied specifically to properties owned by HOA board members who approved fraudulent vendor contracts. The room erupted. Dalton Hardcastle rose from his seat. 6'2" of County Commissioner ego wrapped in a tailored suit and absolute certainty of his own importance. Now wait just a minute. You can't just... Mr. Hardcastle, I would recommend you stop talking. Immediately. I turned to face him directly. Hardcastle Strategic Solutions has billed Lakeview Shores $847,000 over 9 years for services that were never rendered. I have invoices for landscaping that never happened, security upgrades that were never installed, and community events that existed only on paper. The room had gone so quiet, I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. That's vendor fraud. That's theft. And in about, I checked my watch, 12 hours in, Special Agent Cassidy Monroe of the Federal Bureau of Investigation will be very interested in discussing the details with you. Dalton's face had turned an interesting shade of gray. His mouth opened and closed several times, producing no sound. Vivian tried one last time. This is obviously some kind of setup. A vendetta from a disturbed individual who, Mrs. Hardcastle, I have spent the past 3 years of my life putting away people exactly like you. People who thought their position protected them. People who believed that power and connections made them untouchable. I let my eyes sweep the room, meeting the gazes of residents who were only beginning to understand what they had been witnessing. Every single one of them is currently in federal prison. Wallace, the elderly man who had asked about the audits, spoke into the silence. I move that we suspend Vivian Hardcastle as HOA president pending investigation. I second the motion. This from the woman who had asked about the pool renovation. All in favor? Hands rose. Not slowly this time. With the gathered momentum of 9 years of suppressed grievances finally finding release. Vivian looked around the room, at the hands raised against her, at the faces of people she had bullied and threatened and dismissed, at her husband, who had already taken out his phone, presumably to call their lawyer. For the first time since I had met her, she had nothing to say. The resignation came before Friday. Vivian Hardcastle submitted her formal withdrawal from all HOA positions at 4:17 a.m. on Thursday morning. The letter was 2 sentences long and contained no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. By Monday, she and Dalton had retained criminal defense attorneys. By Wednesday, FBI Special Agent Cassidy Monroe had expanded the investigation to include all Wartuteen communities in the Coastal HOA Alliance. The preliminary estimate of misappropriated funds across all properties exceeded $47 million. I watched the news coverage from my dock, coffee in hand, as reporters described the largest HOA fraud case in state history. Vivian declined to comment. Dalton claimed complete ignorance of his own company's billing practices. Odessa Pemberton appeared on my doorstep that Thursday afternoon, carrying a bottle of wine and an expression I had never seen on her face before. It took me a moment to recognize it as joy. The board voted, she said without preamble. Unanimous. Voted on what? The lakefront cottage, the one I've been cleaning for 3 years. Her voice cracked slightly. They're giving it to me, free and clear, for everything I lost. I invited her in. We sat on the dock until sunset, watching light fade from water that reflected nothing but possibilities. 31 years, she said quietly. That's how long my husband and I dreamed of retiring on this lake. He built our house with his own hands, drove every nail, laid every board. What happened to him? Heart gave out 6 months after we lost the house. The doctor said it was medical. I know better. She took a sip of wine. Some things break that can't be measured on machines. We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have both lost things and both found ways to keep moving. You could have sold the house, she finally said. Walked away. Pretended you never saw anything. I could have. Why didn't you? I thought about the question. Thought about the 3 years I had spent chasing Greystone through courtrooms and depositions. About the divorce papers served while I was testifying. About the career I had built and burned and rebuilt from ashes. Because I have seen what happens when good people stay silent. When they convince themselves that someone else will fix the problem. When they decide their own peace is worth more than everyone else's pain. I looked out at the water. And because some days, the only thing that keeps you going is knowing you made the choice that let you sleep at night. Odessa nodded slowly. She understood. Some lessons can only be learned by living them. Wallace Henning, the elderly man who had asked about the reserve fund audits, stopped by Friday afternoon. He brought a bottle of whiskey and a handshake that lasted longer than most conversations. 30 years, he said. 30 years of keeping my head down, because I thought that's what you did. Thank you for reminding me that sometimes you have to stand up. The newly elected HOA board held their first meeting Saturday morning. They asked if I would consider serving as their financial oversight advisor. I said I would think about it. The truth was, I had come to Lakeview Shores looking for peace, looking for a place where the biggest decision I had to make was whether to fish in the morning or the afternoon. Looking for quiet after years of storms. But sometimes peace has to be earned. Sometimes you have to clear out the people who have been using their power to hurt others before the quiet can finally settle in. I was sitting on my dock the following Sunday morning when I saw Odessa walking along the shoreline. She was headed toward her cottage, the one that now belonged to her, moving with a lightness I had not seen in her before. She waved. I waved back. Somewhere across the water, a fish jumped, sending ripples across the glass-smooth surface. The sun was warm on my face. The coffee was hot in my hands. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something that might have been contentment. Vivian Hardcastle called 911 on me for moving into my own house. By the end of that week, she was writing me checks. By the end of that month, she was writing statements to the FBI. Sometimes the best revenge is not getting even. It is getting everything in writing. That story took 3 years of my life to live through, and about 30 minutes of yours to hear. If it meant something to you, if you have ever dealt with someone who thought their power made them untouchable, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to hear what happened next. Because the investigation turned up things even I did not expect. And if you really want to support this channel, that thanks button below the video helps more than you know. I will see you in the next one. The federal investigation took 18 months to complete. When the final report landed on my desk, hand-delivered by Special Agent Cassidy Monroe herself, the numbers were staggering. $47 million in misappropriated funds across 14 communities. 312 families who had lost their homes to manufactured violations. 17 shell companies created specifically to funnel money from reserve accounts into private pockets. Vivian Hardcastle received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison. The judge noted her complete lack of remorse during the proceedings. She maintained her innocence right up until the moment the bailiff led her away in handcuffs. Dalton fared worse. His position as county commissioner meant additional charges for abuse of public trust. 12 years. He would be 73 before he saw the outside of a correctional facility again. The Coastal HOA Alliance dissolved within 6 months of the first arrests. Its regional directors scattered like roaches when the lights came on. Some fled the state. Some turned on each other in exchange for reduced sentences. A few simply disappeared, leaving behind empty bank accounts and forwarding addresses that led nowhere. Restitution payments began arriving to affected families the following spring. Not enough to undo the damage. Never enough for that. But enough to let some people start over. Enough to prove that the system, broken as it often seemed, could still deliver something resembling justice. Odessa planted a garden behind her cottage. Tomatoes and peppers and sunflowers that grew tall enough to see from my dock. She told me her husband had always wanted a garden like that. She tended it every morning at sunrise, talking to the plants like old friends. Wallace Henning passed away peacefully in his sleep 8 months after the trial ended. His daughter told me he had spent his final weeks writing letters to every family the Hardcastles had displaced. Apologies for not speaking up sooner. Encouragement to keep fighting. Reminders that one voice can change everything if it refuses to stay silent. I kept the house, keep the dock, kept the view that the previous owner had stolen other people's money. Some mornings I still wake up expecting another fight, another Vivian, another system rigged against people who play by the rules. Old habits die hard when you have spent years learning that peace is never permanent. But most mornings now, I just make coffee, sit on the dock, watch the sun come up over water that reflects nothing but sky. The lake does not care about HOA violations or reserve fund fraud or the complicated wreckage of human greed. It just exists, calm and patient and indifferent to the storms that pass across its surface. I have learned to appreciate that kind of peace, the kind you earn by standing up when it matters, the kind that comes after the fighting is done.
Thanks for staying to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe to IS Stories.